They tried to save her. But at exactly 3:55 p.m., Whitney Houston was pronounced dead at the Beverly Hilton Hotel. Not long after, Dexter King, the youngest son of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., also passed away at 62. Addiction doesn't care who you are. It doesn't care about your fame, your fortune, or your talent. It follows, haunts, and eventually destroys even the brightest stars. Some think the spotlight protects them, but often it's the spotlight itself, the pressure, the isolation, the constant demand to be perfect, that pushes them over the edge. The 17 names we're about to reveal once stood on top of the world. They had it all: glory, money, fans screaming their names. But behind the scenes, they were crumbling, addicted. And in the end, many died alone, forgotten, and consumed by the very demons they tried to hide. They once ruled Hollywood. But what happened to them? Are you ready to uncover the truth? If you are, don't look away. David Ruffin, the voice that lit up the world, silenced by addiction. David Ruffin was once soul music's crown jewel, the electrifying lead voice behind The Temptations' timeless hit, My Girl, in 1964. With his raw, emotionally charged vocals and magnetic stage presence, Ruffin didn't just sing, he commanded every room he stepped into. At the peak of his fame, he was the face of Motown magic, adored by fans, draped in luxury, and living the high life of music, money, and glamour. But behind the stage lights was a man quietly unraveling. Ruffin battled demons few ever saw. Deep down, he felt overlooked, never fully recognized for his talent. That hunger for validation became an obsession. His ego swelled, and when paired with the crushing pressure of fame and the loneliness that came with it, David turned to the one thing he believed would never betray him: drugs. The fall began in 1968. Ruffin was kicked out of The Temptations after skipping shows, showing up late, and demanding top billing. He couldn't accept being just another voice in the group. He wanted the spotlight all to himself. When the group refused, he spiraled. The rejection shattered him, and cocaine, heroin, and alcohol became his escape. Throughout the 1970s, his addiction tightened its grip. The money from his golden years vanished into a haze of drugs and arrests, cocaine possession, violent outbursts, rehab stints followed by relapses. The man once revered as a soul icon became a shadow of himself, broke, unstable, with eyes that had seen too much. Labels stopped calling. Collaborators backed away. Even his family watched, helpless, as he slipped further away. By the late 80s, Ruffin was a fading memory, playing tiny gigs just to feed his addiction. Then came May 31, 1991, Philadelphia. A dingy apartment, a drug-fueled party. Ruffin took a massive dose of cocaine, far too much for a body already broken by decades of abuse. Around 2 a.m. on June 1st, he slumped in a chair, pale, barely breathing. No one called for help. Afraid of the consequences, they dumped him outside a hospital. No ID, no name, just another addict in the night. By 6 a.m., David Ruffin was pronounced dead. Cocaine overdose. Age, 50. No fortune. No family beside him. No final applause. The voice that once made the world swoon died alone on a cold sidewalk. His funeral was quiet. No grand send-off, no star-studded tribute. Just a plain casket, a handful of mourners, and a legacy buried under the weight of fame, addiction, and the silence of those who turned away. David Ruffin once stood on top of the world. But in the end, he was just another lost genius swallowed by the very dream that made him famous. Phyllis Heyman, a soulful queen silenced by pain. Phyllis Heyman had a voice that could stop time. Rich, soulful, and heartbreakingly beautiful. With hits like You Know How to Love Me and Living All Alone, she ruled the stage like a goddess of R&B, radiating elegance, seduction, and unmatched vocal power. To the world, she was a star. But behind the glamour lived a woman unraveling, fighting demons no spotlight could hide. Beneath her smile was a life haunted by depression, loneliness, and addiction. Her beauty masked a constant ache, one that lingered in the quiet moments and bled into every note she sang. The final years of her life were a painful loop, crumbling relationships, industry betrayal, and the unbearable weight of being forgotten by the very world that once worshipped her. Those close to her saw the signs. Phyllis would walk into the studio with red, swollen eyes, a trembling cigarette between her fingers, and a bottle of liquor rolling across the table. She drank to numb the hurt of fame-hungry lovers who vanished when the spotlight dimmed, of being used, discarded, and left hollow. With each heartbreak, she sank deeper into pills and booze. What once was passion on stage became torment. Some nights, she'd stumble to the microphone, barely conscious, her voice slurred by sleeping pills, her body wrecked by alcohol. Sometimes she collapsed backstage, needing help just to stand. The bookings dried up. The big deals stopped coming. Fans faded. The music industry, once her kingdom, turned its back. Phyllis was no longer the radiant queen of the 70s, just another forgotten voice trying to survive. Then came the night of June 30th, 1995. Alone in her apartment, Phyllis tried calling a few friends. No one answered. Whatever thoughts consumed her in that moment, we'll never truly know. But as night fell, she quietly penned a goodbye note, swallowed a fatal dose of sleeping pills, had one last drink, and waited. No one came. By morning, Phyllis Heyman was gone, lifeless in her bed, her body cold and tinted with the blue of death. She was just 45. A voice once so full of life, now silenced by sorrow, pills, and a world that let her fall. Her death wasn't just a tragedy. It was a final, haunting verse to a song the world refused to listen to in time. Rick James, the funk legend who died chained to his demons. Rick James was more than a music icon. He was the embodiment of funk, a wild firestorm of sound and soul. In the 1970s and 80s, he ruled the charts with electrifying hits like Super Freak and Give It To Me Baby. His music pulsed with swagger, rebellion, and raw, unfiltered energy. But behind the stage lights and screaming fans was a man spiraling into darkness. Rick James didn't just party, he lived the party. Drugs, booze, and chaos weren't weekend indulgences. They were his daily reality. It began with marijuana, but quickly escalated: cocaine, heroin, pills, anything to keep the high going. He later confessed to spending millions feeding his addictions. His performances were fueled by that frenzy, singing through plumes of smoke, eyes red with coke, body thrashing in a haze of excess. But what once felt like magic soon turned into a monster he couldn't escape. The drugs began to eat away at his body, his mind, and eventually, his soul. His music couldn't save him from the headlines. Rick James became infamous not just for funk but for felonies. Arrested for assault, accused of kidnapping women, committing horrific acts while high. The flamboyant star was now a courtroom regular. Jail time. Relapse. Repeat. The fall was brutal. By the 2000s, the fire was gone. The vibrant Rick James had become a shadow, frail, tired, performing for nostalgia in small venues, desperately holding on to faded glory. And then came the final chapter. On August 6, 2004, in a Los Angeles apartment, Rick James was found dead at age 56. The cause? A heart attack. But when the autopsy was done, the truth was clearer than ever. 9 different drugs were found in his system: cocaine, methamphetamine, Valium, and more. This wasn't sudden. It was slow suicide. A body broken after years of self-destruction. Rick James didn't die in a blaze of glory. He died alone, the music silenced, buried beneath the wreckage of a life lived too fast, too furiously. A cautionary tale of what happens when talent burns brighter than the man behind it. Donnie Hathaway, a soulful genius silenced by inner demons. Donnie Hathaway had a voice that could melt pain, a gift so raw and pure it seemed to come straight from the heavens. With timeless classics like A Song for You and The Ghetto, he became a pillar of soul and R&B, his music echoing in hearts long after the last note. But behind that golden voice was a man silently unraveling, haunted by demons no one could truly see. While the world applauded his brilliance, Donnie battled an invisible war. Diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, he lived in constant fear, convinced that people were watching him, that forces were trying to control his mind. The torment grew unbearable. Hallucinations plagued him. Reality blurred. And in a desperate attempt to quiet the noise, he turned to alcohol and drugs. But they didn't save him. They only deepened the darkness. The man who once filled arenas now struggled to function. His addiction made him unpredictable, distant, a stranger to those who once stood closest to him. Friends drifted. Collaborators gave up. Donnie Hathaway became a lonely shadow of himself, pacing empty rooms, drowned in liquor, and haunted by voices only he could hear. On the night of January 12, 1979, he was alone in his New York apartment. He wandered, murmuring to himself, eyes hollow, his soul clearly in torment. And by dawn, his body was found on the sidewalk below, fallen from the 15th floor. Police called it suicide, likely driven by one final, tragic delusion. He was just 33. Donnie Hathaway didn't die from lack of talent or love. He died from a battle his brilliance couldn't silence. A voice that once comforted millions was snuffed out in a moment of despair. His death wasn't just a loss for music, it was a heartbreaking reminder that even the brightest stars can be consumed by the shadows they hide. Jimi Hendrix, the terrifying fall of a musical god gripped by addiction. Jimi Hendrix wasn't just a rock star, he was a force of nature. The greatest guitar genius the world had ever seen. With explosive riffs and mind-bending creativity, he redefined rock music forever. Hits like Purple Haze and Voodoo Child weren't just songs, they were cultural earthquakes. Hendrix earned the awe of fans and legends alike. But behind the psychedelic magic and electric solos was a man slowly being torn apart by fame, pressure, and a drug addiction he could no longer control. Hendrix wasn't an ordinary celebrity. He was the voice of a restless, rebellious generation. But the same wild spirit that made him a legend also led to his destruction. In his final years, Hendrix became a shadow of himself. He drank heavily, popped sleeping pills like candy, and slipped deeper into a world of hallucinations and paranoia. His eyes were always bloodshot, his frame frail. His words, often slurred beyond recognition. He was unraveling in plain sight, but no one could reach him. After his unforgettable performance of the Star-Spangled Banner at Woodstock in 1969, the descent quickened. Sleepless nights turned into erratic shows. Rage-filled outbursts replaced his usual cool. Friends stepped back. Labels got nervous. The only things that stayed by his side were bottles and pills. Then came the night of September 17, 1970. Hendrix had just returned to London after an exhausting tour. He drank nonstop, swallowed a dangerous dose of barbiturate sleeping pills. A friend who often got high with him found Hendrix sitting on the edge of the bed, eyes glazed over, mumbling words that made no sense. By morning it was too late. Jimi Hendrix was found cold and unresponsive. He had choked to death on his own vomit, alone, in silence. Blood on the sheets. Pills in his system. A lethal mix of alcohol and sleeping drugs had taken the life of a legend at just 27. No one heard his final cry. No one stopped the fall. That day, the world didn't just lose a rock icon. It lost a man who burned too brightly for too long. Hendrix's death wasn't just tragic, it was a brutal reminder. No matter how gifted, how legendary, no one is invincible to the darkness of addiction. Not even a genius. Billie Holiday, the voice that shattered hearts, silenced by addiction. Billie Holiday. A name once whispered in smoky jazz clubs and etched into history with every haunting note. Her voice, raspy, raw, and dripping with emotion, defined a generation. Strange Fruit exposed the brutal truth of racism. God Bless the Child became an anthem of heartbreak and survival. But behind the velvet curtains and stage lights, Billie lived a life soaked in pain. Fame couldn't protect her from the shadows of her past. From childhood, she knew suffering, poverty, abuse, abandonment. Loneliness wrapped around her like a second skin. And to escape it, she turned to alcohol and heroin, small comforts that quickly became deadly chains. What began as an escape turned into a vicious addiction that consumed her soul. By the 1940s, Billie was deteriorating. Her eyes dulled, her once powerful voice began to falter, and her arms were littered with needle marks. Her performances became less about the music and more about survival, each show a struggle against the demons eating her alive. Friends walked away. The money vanished. And the legend became a fading shadow. In her final years, Billie drifted through cheap hotel rooms and dark corners, completely alone, her only company, a bottle and a needle. She tried to quit, over and over. But addiction is cruel. Every time she tried to run, it dragged her back in, stronger, colder, more ruthless. On May 31, 1959, the unimaginable happened. Lying weak and helpless in a hospital bed, weighing less than 100 pounds, she was arrested for drug possession. Even then, handcuffed and guarded by police, she was treated like a criminal, not the jazz icon she was. Her body was too far gone. She couldn't fight anymore. On July 17, 1959, at just 44 years old, Billie Holiday died alone. Liver failure. Heart failure. A body broken by addiction and neglect. There were no final goodbyes, no loved ones at her side, only a cold hospital room and the silence left behind by a voice that once shook the world. Billie didn't just die, she was forgotten by the very world she helped shape. But her story remains, a chilling reminder of how even the brightest stars can be consumed by darkness. She left behind a legacy of music that still haunts us, and a heartbreaking sense of what could have been. Len Bias, the legend who never got to rise. Len Bias was more than just a promising athlete. He was a once-in-a-generation talent, destined to carry the torch from legends like Larry Bird and Magic Johnson. On June 17, 1986, the Boston Celtics selected him in the NBA draft. It was supposed to be the beginning of something historic. At just 22, Bias was on the brink of greatness. Millions watched as a new star was born. But just 2 days later, that future was ripped away. On the night of June 18th, celebrating with friends, Len tried cocaine for the first time, young, excited, and unaware of the deadly risk. Within moments, the drug surged through his bloodstream, pushing his heart into chaos. His body trembled, his breath shortened, and then he collapsed. Right there on the floor, surrounded by celebration, a life was slipping away. By 8 a.m. on June 19th, doctors pronounced Len Bias dead. Cause: cardiac arrhythmia due to a cocaine overdose. The nation was stunned. One of basketball's brightest hopes, gone in a heartbeat. The Celtics lost their future. The game lost a star. And fans across America lost a legend before he ever had the chance to shine. His death wasn't just a tragedy, it was a wake-up call. The NBA was forced to confront the silent danger lurking behind the scenes. Drug policies were overhauled. Awareness campaigns launched. But none of it could bring Len Bias back. He left behind a broken dream, frozen in time. A story of potential never realized, of a legacy that lived and died in the space of 48 hours. And for those who watched him rise, the wound of his loss still echoes. A reminder that sometimes, one moment is all it takes to change everything. Ray Charles, a musical genius undone by addiction. Ray Charles wasn't just a musician, he was a force of nature. A genius who shaped the sound of jazz, blues, and soul with unmatched brilliance. Born blind, he defied every limitation, rising to the top with a voice that stirred souls and piano skills that moved crowds to tears. But behind the legend, behind the standing ovations and gold records, was a man silently drowning in pain. From as early as the 1940s, drugs and alcohol clung to Ray like shadows he couldn't shake. Heroin, whiskey, pills, they became his refuge, his poison, his curse. He knew they were killing him. But addiction doesn't care how talented you are. It drags down even the greats. Publicly, he was a powerhouse. Privately, he was falling apart. Years of substance abuse wrecked his body. Hospital stays, grueling surgeries, and a constant craving that never let him rest. He was losing the fight, one hit, one drink at a time. On June 10, 2004, the music stopped. Ray Charles, the icon who gave the world Georgia on My Mind, Hit the Road Jack, and so many timeless classics, passed away at 73. But it wasn't time that took him, it was liver failure. The final, brutal price of decades spent battling heroin and alcohol. In his last months, Ray was confined to his bed. Frail. Fading. His world shrinking to silence, save for the echoes of his own music playing somewhere in the distance. No spotlight. No applause. Just a man alone with the pain he'd carried for years. His death wasn't unexpected, but it was still devastating. Ray Charles didn't fade because the stage lights went dark. He faded because addiction burned through him until there was nothing left to fight with. A legend, but also a cautionary tale of how even the brightest stars can be dimmed by demons they can't outrun. Old Dirty Bastard, a wild soul silenced by addiction. Russell Tyrone Jones, better known to the world as Old Dirty Bastard, or simply ODB, wasn't just a member of the legendary Wu-Tang Clan. He was a force of nature. With his raw energy, outrageous personality, and rebellious rhymes, ODB didn't just perform hip-hop, he lived it. Fans loved him for being wild, unpredictable, and unapologetically real. But behind the wild persona was a man spiraling into chaos. ODB's story wasn't just about fame, it was a slow, heartbreaking descent into self-destruction. Despite his genius and charisma, drugs became the tragic center of his life. Cocaine, heroin, alcohol. One after another, they took their toll. The same fire that lit up the stage also burned him from the inside. His arrests, his erratic behavior, and his time behind bars weren't just headlines, they were cries for help that never reached anyone in time. He tried to fight back, but addiction had its grip tight. And as his world unraveled, the industry watched a once bright star fade into darkness. Then came November 13, 2004. ODB was on his way to a recording studio when tragedy struck. Hours later, he was found lifeless in his car, gone at just 35 years old. The cause? A deadly mix of cocaine and tramadol. It wasn't shocking, but it was devastating. His death didn't just mark the loss of a rapper. It marked the collapse of a dream that never had the chance to fully unfold. He died with music still in him, plans still unspoken, and fans still waiting. A career cut short. A voice forever silenced. Old Dirty Bastard was chaotic, magnetic, brilliant, and broken. He paid the price for a life lived too fast, leaving behind a legacy filled with both unforgettable brilliance and haunting what-ifs. At just 35, the hip-hop world lost a legend. Not to the mic, but to the madness that fame too often hides. Pimp C, a southern rap icon lost to the shadows of addiction. Chad Lamont Butler, known to the world as Pimp C, wasn't just a rapper. He was a southern legend, a lyrical pioneer who co-founded UGK with Bun B and helped define the sound of 90s southern hip-hop. His voice dripped with soul, his verses were raw truth, and his beats carried the heartbeat of the streets. But behind the fame, behind the platinum records and stage lights, was a man slowly being devoured by addiction. From the moment he stepped into the spotlight, Pimp C was already battling demons. Codeine, the syrupy, dangerous drug hiding in cough medicine, became his poison of choice. It didn't stop there. Alcohol, cocaine, and sleepless nights followed, creating a toxic storm that took over his life. While fans heard hits, Pimp C was losing control, one sip, one line at a time. His career was soaring, but his personal life was falling apart. Legal troubles and jail time pulled him further into darkness. He tried to fight back, tried to rise again, but the cravings were stronger than his will. The pain wasn't just in his body, it haunted his mind too. A man with so much to say, silenced by his own struggle. Then came December 4, 2007. The news hit like a punch to the chest. Pimp C was found dead in a Los Angeles hotel room. Just 33 years old. No gunshots, no foul play, just the silent killer he'd known all along. A deadly mix of codeine and sleep apnea had stopped his heart. The coroner's report revealed multiple drugs in his system, proof that he'd been fighting a losing battle with addiction for years. The hip-hop community was stunned. How could someone so gifted, so full of life and energy, be gone so soon? Fans mourned not just the man, but the potential, the legacy, the verses he'd never get to write. Pimp C's death wasn't just a tragedy, it was a warning. A rising star was lost forever. And with him, Southern rap lost a voice it would never be able to replace. Ike Turner, a music legend destroyed by his own demons. Ike Turner was a pioneer, a groundbreaking force who helped shape the sound of rock and roll. Alongside Tina Turner, he produced unforgettable hits that defined a generation and earned his place in music history. But behind the fame and rhythm was a man slowly unraveling. Beneath the stage lights and screaming fans lived a darker reality, one consumed by addiction, regret, and inner torment. For decades, cocaine, alcohol, and cigarettes were his constant companions. Every time he tried to rise above, the grip of drugs dragged him back down. Even at the height of his success, he was a man at war with himself, trapped in a spiral of self-destruction. Ike wasn't just known for his volatile marriage with Tina Turner, he was also a prisoner of his own addictions. His time behind bars, the physical toll of drugs, and the emotional wreckage slowly turned his life into a cautionary tale. The hits kept playing, but the man behind them was crumbling. On December 12, 2007, Ike Turner died at 76, not from violence or accident, but from the silent killers he had courted for years. A cocaine overdose, paired with heart and lung disease, finally took him. By then his body was frail, his soul weary, and his name no longer lit up marquees. In his final days, he was alone. No family, no fans, just a broken shell of the man he once was. What remains are the songs, the scandals, and a legacy forever shadowed by tragedy. Ike Turner's death wasn't just the end of a musical legend. It was a haunting reminder that even the brightest talents can fall victim to the darkness within. Whitney Houston, a voice from heaven, silenced by hell. Whitney Houston was more than a singer, she was a force of nature. With a voice that could shake souls and a presence that lit up the world stage, she became a global icon. Hits like "I Will Always Love You" didn't just top charts. They became timeless anthems of love and longing. In the eyes of millions, Whitney was untouchable, a goddess of sound in the spotlight. But behind the curtain, her life was unraveling. As early as the peak of her fame, Whitney began slipping into the grip of cocaine and alcohol. Alongside her husband, Bobby Brown, himself battling demons of addiction, Whitney's fairy tale life morphed into a waking nightmare. The woman once hailed as America's sweetheart became a tragic symbol of downfall. Years of substance abuse eroded her radiant voice and chipped away at her body and spirit. The sparkle in her eyes faded. The pain, both physical and emotional, became her daily companion. Then came February 11, 2012. Inside the Beverly Hilton Hotel, Whitney was found unresponsive in a bathtub. The world gasped, but it was already too late. The official cause of death, drowning. But that only scratched the surface. Cocaine, her longtime, silent destroyer, had weakened her heart beyond repair. The combination of drug overdose and heart disease robbed her of consciousness, leaving her helpless, alone in a hotel bathroom, far from the adoring crowds who once worshipped her. It was a tragic end for a woman whose voice once soared to the heavens. Addiction had stripped away her health, her career, her joy, and finally her life. Prince, a musical genius silenced by pain and pills. Prince wasn't just an icon, he was a revolution. A visionary who redefined sound, style, and freedom with timeless hits like Purple Rain and Kiss. With his electric stage presence and unmatched artistry, he lit up the world. To millions, he was the symbol of creativity without limits, a shining force in music history. But behind the glitter, a silent battle was raging. In his final years, the man who once seemed untouchable was quietly unraveling. Chronic pain from a devastating hip injury turned every performance into agony. And to keep going, Prince leaned on something darker: painkillers. Among them was fentanyl, a drug so potent and deadly it's earned the name the Silent Killer. He thought it was helping him survive the pain. Instead, it was slowly taking everything. He never knew just how lethal it was. Just days before his death, Prince was rushed to the hospital after an overdose. His body was weakening, but his spirit kept fighting. He made it back home to Paisley Park, his sanctuary, his creative temple. But on the morning of April 21, 2016, Prince was found collapsed in the elevator. Alone. unconscious, and too late to be saved. The autopsy confirmed the grim truth: a fatal dose of fentanyl. The drug he used to manage pain had turned into a merciless executioner. It had betrayed him again and again, but he couldn't break free. In the end, it didn't just numb the pain. It ended the music, ended the magic, ended the man. Prince died not in the spotlight, but in silence. And the world lost a legend, too soon, too suddenly, and far too tragically. DMX, the king of street rap, broken by the demons he couldn't outrun. DMX wasn't just a rapper, he was a force of nature. A raw, unfiltered symbol of pain, rage, and resilience. With his growling voice, explosive energy, and anthems like Rough Riders Anthem and Party Up, he didn't just make music, he made history. But behind the mic was a man tormented by demons far greater than fame could ever silence. Born in 1970 in Yonkers, New York, Earl Simmons, known to the world as DMX, grew up in a world of violence, abandonment, and survival. His childhood was filled with abuse. At just 14, someone he trusted handed him a blunt laced with cocaine. He didn't know. That single moment ignited a lifelong addiction, a doorway to darkness he could never close. Even as his star rose, his soul remained trapped. He sold millions of records, dominated charts, and electrified stages. But offstage, DMX battled an endless cycle of addiction and incarceration. Rehab stints came and went. So did the arrests, drug possession, DUIs, probation violations. The warrior fans saw on stage was quietly unraveling behind closed doors. Then came April 2, 2021. DMX collapsed at home from a drug overdose. Rushed to the hospital, his heart had stopped for 30 minutes. His brain deprived of oxygen for too long. Though doctors revived him, the damage was irreversible. He was placed on life support, but the spark, the fight, was gone. On April 9, 2021, surrounded by loved ones, DMX's family made the agonizing decision to let him go. He passed away at White Plains Hospital, leaving behind a legacy that was as painful as it was powerful. DMX once roared like a lion in the face of pain. But in the end, he died silent, still, and paralyzed in a hospital bed, his body motionless, his voice gone. The king of street rap had fallen, not from a rival, but from the relentless weight of a life filled with hurt, betrayal, and addiction. And though he's gone, the echoes of his truth, raw, loud, and unapologetic, still shake the walls of hip-hop. Julio, the Gangsta's Paradise icon who couldn't escape the darkness. Julio was once the unapologetic voice of the streets, a rap icon whose gritty lyrics and unforgettable flow turned Gangsta's Paradise into a global anthem. In 1995, he wasn't just topping charts, he was speaking for an entire generation caught between survival and self-destruction. The Grammy-winning track sold millions and etched his name into hip-hop history. But behind the fame, behind the music, lived a man still shackled by demons he could never fully outrun. Born in 1963 in the tough neighborhoods of Pennsylvania, Julio grew up in a world where poverty, violence, and addiction lurked on every corner. He bounced between gangs, arrests, and drug binges before he even found his voice. But when he did, through music, it was electric. His rhymes told the truth, raw and unfiltered, and the world listened. Yet even as the lights of stardom burned bright, the shadows never left him. Julio spent years battling addiction, sometimes clean, often not. He tried to rise above it, but the grip of drugs proved too tight. And on September 28, 2022, those demons claimed him for good. While visiting a friend in Los Angeles, Julio stepped into the bathroom and never came back out. When his friend broke down the door, they found him lifeless on the floor. His heart had stopped. The autopsy delivered a grim truth. His body was filled with fentanyl, a synthetic opioid 50 times stronger than heroin, along with traces of cocaine and heroin. A cocktail of death. Julio gave the world Gangsta's Paradise, a song that still echoes through time. But in the end, he didn't die in paradise. He died in solitude, in silence, in the same darkness he once rapped so powerfully about. Gangsta Buu, the final verse of a southern rap queen. On New Year's Day 2023, while the world celebrated fresh beginnings, tragedy struck quietly in Memphis. Lola Chantrell Mitchell, known to fans as Gangsta Buu, was found lifeless in her home. At just 43, the trailblazing rapper who once shook the foundations of Southern hip-hop was gone. She burst onto the scene at only 15, joining the legendary 3-6 Mafia and becoming one of the first female voices in hardcore rap. With her raw lyrics, gritty tone, and fearless energy, Gangsta Buu carved out a space in a male-dominated world and owned it. She wasn't just part of the movement, she was the movement, a true icon of Southern rap. But behind the fierce persona was a woman fighting silent battles. Drugs, once the backdrop of all-night parties and studio sessions, slowly became chains she couldn't break. What once sparked her creativity turned into her downfall. On that fateful morning, January 1st, the very substances she once leaned on took her life. The autopsy revealed a lethal mix of fentanyl and cocaine, a deadly cocktail that ended everything in a flash. A new year had just begun, but Gangsta Buu had already taken her final bow. Her passing left a painful silence in hip-hop, a genre she helped shape, a culture that still feels her absence. For her fans and a generation of artists, she'll forever be the queen of Memphis, gone too soon, but never forgotten. Dexter King, the tragic fall of a civil rights heir. Dexter King was born into history, the son of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., a living legacy expected to carry the torch of greatness. From the moment he took his first breath, the weight of his father's dream pressed heavily on his shoulders. The world watched, waiting for him to rise, to lead, to become a reflection of the icon who bore him. But that shadow was too large, the pressure too suffocating. And instead of finding his own light, Dexter lost himself in the darkness. Struggling to carve out his identity, to live up to the impossible expectations, he turned to what so many broken souls do: alcohol and drugs. At first, they numbed the pain. Then they took control. Addiction consumed him year after year, chipping away at his health, his spirit, and his very will to live. By 2024, his body had endured all it could. The damage was irreversible. Organ failure came slowly, but mercilessly. And on January 22, 2024, Dexter King took his final breath. Another bright name dimmed by a battle he couldn't win. He was 62. A son of a king, laid low by the cruel hand of addiction. But his death, like those of so many others, isn't just a personal tragedy, it's a mirror. A sobering reminder of what addiction can steal, even from those born with everything. These stars once had it all: fame, power, promise. But in the end, they lost everything in the most heartbreaking way. The brighter the light, the darker the fall. Which of these stories stayed with you the most? Which loss hits you hardest? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and tap the notification bell, because behind Hollywood's spotlight, there are still so many stories left in the shadows.